Our guest today is John Rafferty, also known as Johnny Walker Santiago. He is an iconic figure in the pilgrim scene, looking after pilgrims in Santiago, and he himself has done a transformative journey from an executive in management to being of service to pilgrims. And we've had him on this show a couple of times. The last episode we did was on the topic of overcapacity on the Camino and the issue of over tourism. So we're doing an update today on how the Camino is looking for this year and on some of the topics that we are having on the social media sites. I want to start off, John. How are you doing in Santiago? How are things looking in Santiago?
Well, the sun is shining, thank goodness, today. We've had some rain, but also had a dry and very sunny spell. Great walking weather here in Galicia, and I think probably in other parts of Spain as well. I was down in the Costa del Sol for a few weeks. I came back up to Santiago only yesterday, actually, and the weather down there has just been stunning. So people walking the Via de la Plata or the Camino Mozárabe, as well as walking the Camino Frances, would have very good weather recently.
I've been just looking at some of the figures. Last year, we thought the number of pilgrims would somehow reach their peak. But from what we're seeing, we're even going to supersede the numbers from last year with I'm seeing figures of well over 500,000 for this year.
Well, I don't think there's any doubt about that, Rhino. As of today, as of right now, 5 minutes ago, I checked the statistics. Just over 488,000 Compostelas have been issued. But of course, we're 10 weeks away from the end of the year. So in another week or so, we will be at 500,000, and then we will trail off towards the end of the year, 400, 520, 530,000. But of course, and I don't think maybe we didn't know this the last time you and I spoke about this issue, but the authorities have been trying out an experiment at various points of various caminos. They've been using geolocation devices to ping mobile telephones. Now, they're doing this at spots where really only pilgrims pass by. So they're counting the number of telephones that walk past these monitors. And the early results suggest there may be as many as 40% more pilgrims arrive in Santiago than collect the Compostela. So that number of 530,000 could be 750,000. So do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So as the years go by, they're developing more sophisticated methods of counting the number of pilgrims. In saying all of this, I have never heard, and you know that I run these Facebook groups and I'm a bit obsessed with Facebook, and we're now up to well over 600,000 members of our Facebook groups. And I've never heard one report in the last year of people not getting a bed. Now, they've maybe had to be flexible and adjust their programs and maybe book ahead for a couple of days, but I've never I've never heard of a pilgrim being homeless yet.
Well, that concurs with my experience, John, because we walked the Invierno this year, as you know,
Mm.
and many of the villages we walked through were fairly empty.
Yes.
And I've had the same feedback from other pilgrims walking the Frances. The only real problem is the last bit from Sarria, where people have had some accommodation issues. But the Camino, just correct me if I'm wrong, is adapting very fast to the numbers of pilgrims, isn't it?
Well, this is fascinating, Reino, because as you know, um, some of my veteran friends and colleagues who hark back to the old days and the traditional Camino and so forth lament this great surge in numbers, and it seems unstoppable. And recently, I was talking to a young man who just finished his degree, got a first class honours in sociology, and his thesis was on the forces of capitalism in the Camino to Santiago. And it's very interesting. And of course, a lot of this is common sense. So the numbers go up. So the local authorities and the tourism authorities invest, they make grants for the expansion of albergues. And having made the grants, they've then got to promote the Camino to ensure that their investment is used well and that the beds are full. So it's a cycle that maintains itself, and there's no sign of it stopping.
Yeah. Getting back to the veteran pilgrims, as you know, there's a lot of discussion on how to do the Camino the right way. And I don't know if you share my opinion, but there's quite a lot of judgmental views on people not carrying their backpacks themselves or just doing a short route. What's your take on that?
My view is the authentic way to do the Camino is to put on your walking shoes, arrive at a Camino starting point, wherever that is, and walk the Camino to Santiago. It seems to me largely irrelevant whether you stay in hostels or albergues, whether you send your a bag forward or not. And the important thing is to walk and to have the experience of walking and meeting other pilgrims and reaching Santiago. Now, some traditionalists would say that the way to do this, John, is to pack all of your luggage, all of your belongings, all that you need in a rucksack and carry it all the way to Santiago and sleep in albergues, in dormitories with other pilgrims. And certainly that was a tradition in the modern era of the pilgrim. It's not a tradition from the Middle Ages when they did it in all sorts of ways, nor is it a tradition from the early 20th century. Walter Starkey, for example, the great exponent of the Camino at the beginning of the 20th century, took buses and taxis and donkeys and all sorts of ways to get to Santiago. The important thing for him was reaching Santiago. Now, if I could just labour this point for a moment. Um, as you know, I'm a church organist, and many traditionalists in church music would say plain chant and Latin, that's the way to go. And John, all your modern, newfangled church music is just that. It's newfangled and it's not sufficiently traditional, but it serves the liturgy. And so somebody walking the Camino in whatever way they want to do it, as long as I would say walking the Camino, they're making their Camino and it's authentic for them. And that's good enough for me. And, I learned very early on in this business, Reino, the one rule that I need to apply to myself is to keep my nose out of other people's Caminos.
This judgmental view on how to do the Camino correctly seems to be coming particularly from Camino veterans. And I often think of my own first walk from Saria, my very first walk, and how difficult it was for me at that time. And now I'm on more than 14 Caminos. And I'm thinking back now, if I hadn't had that initial experience, the Camino bug would never have bitten.
Yes. Well, my first Camino was a solitary Camino on the Via de la Plata on the 2nd of January 2007. I set out from Seville with a far too heavy rucksack. I stayed in freezing albergues. I slept outside overnight one night, and it was a wonderful experience, Rhino. But I wouldn't do it again.
No.
So, do you know what I mean? So
Exactly. I know
my,
what you
my,
mean.
my, my father always said there's no such thing as the good old days. The good old days are the days that we look on with nostalgia, when we didn't have central heating and we didn't have fitted carpets
Yeah.
and we didn't
Yeah.
have we didn't have telephones, we didn't have color televisions. But things change and there's no going back. In saying all of this, Rhino, my friends who protect the great traditions of the Camino, the Donativo albergues, the traditional way of doing the Camino, and so forth. I have huge respect for them. Um, but we mustn't judge people who won't do it our way.
Exactly. I agree completely. Now, let's touch on people's expectation and the actual experience of doing the Camino.
Well, I think you've touched it up on a big issue. And the Camino to Santiago and walking long distance is not for everyone. And I set off from Saint Jean Pied de Port I think in November, a beautiful November month. The weather was like it is at the moment. And to put on sunscreen on my bald head, and I met about 11 or 12 people going up the route Napoleon. And by the time we reached Pamplona, several of them were phoning taxis to take them to the station because they'd had enough. The Camino is not for everyone, and some people can't cope with the discomfort of the odd blister or shin splints, or just can't cope with the physical exertion, particularly if they've not done very much preparation. Now, I think people also have an expectation that the Camino will reach into their heart and change their lives. And I think some people can be very disappointed that there's not an immediate effect, a road to Damascus conversion to believing in God or sorting out problems or resolving internal conflicts or issues. But I have to say that the majority of people that I speak to over time talk about the major impact the Camino has had on their lives. That gave them time for reflection, time to recognize issues that they needed to address, time to talk to themselves, talk to whoever their higher being is about their fears, and then over time to address issues in their life. And I think that's the wonderful impact of the Camino de Santiago.
Yeah, if I look at my own life, my own Camino journey, the Camino was really always weeks, months after actually walking.
Mm,
That's when I had those intense dreams. That's when I had those reflections. That's when I had those memories of some of those stages I walked through. And
yes.
I think people sometimes might be just too impatient, expecting too much whilst on the Camino itself.
But, I think looking back, just walking the Camino itself was enough for me. Um, and I'm not sure what I expected. Um, I did not expect it to change my life in the way in which it has. I didn't expect to have the profound moments of reflection that I found myself in, particularly walking the Great Meseta.
Hmm.
I just set off and I couldn't see where I was going, just this straight line ahead of me. But of course, it was like a meditation, just plodding along, mulling over your thoughts, getting lost in your thoughts, thinking about things. I always describe it as thinking about the past, thinking about the future, and how did I get here, and where am I going? And this was very much my thought process. And of course, I thought my plan was to live in Seville when I retired. And I didn't know until somebody told me and planted the seed about the Camino that one of the oldest routes, the Via de la Plata, starts in Seville. So I set off from Seville and I looked back at the town thinking, I'm going to come back and retire here and live here in this town, but I need to get to Santiago first. But 36 days later, when I got to Santiago, I had discovered this magnificent, almost like a parallel universe of pilgrimage, which exists in every culture, every country, every
Hmm.
major culture has pilgrimage routes and people. Right now, there are people walking pilgrimage routes all over the world, in India, in Japan, in France, in Canada, and so forth, um, and all trying to find something. And it's up to the root when you find it. But it took me some time to realize I had to make deep changes in my life. And
Yeah.
one of these changes was not going to retire to Seville, but coming to live in Santiago.
Yeah. Yeah, let's touch on that, John. There seems to be happening something collectively, a search for meaning, for purpose, and it's something deeply spiritual outside the institution church. And many people who walk the Camino walk it for secular reasons, wanting experience in nature, wanting an adventure. But the Camino itself seems to really change people very much also on a spiritual level, even if they are non-religious, in quotes.
Well, my theory, and it only is my theory about this, and I wrote about it, about the bells of the cathedral that have been ringing up there for 1,000 years, look down on the Plaza Obradoiro when all these pilgrims arrive every day. And I suspect that there are very few, if any, pilgrims who arrive didn't want to change in some way when they started off. I think change is a motivation. It might be losing weight. It might be changing your life. It might be like me pondering a life change from a career change to retirement and volunteering and so forth. It may be resolving difficulties in a relationship. It may it may be wanting a relationship. You know, there are hundreds of reasons in the same way as there are hundreds of human beings. And I think people are motivated to set out on this adventure of the Camino de Santiago because either they're aware of it or deep down they want to change in some way.
Yeah. Now you've spoken to hundreds, if not thousands, of pilgrims over the years.
Hmm.
How have the demographics changed compared to the time when you spent your first years in Santiago?
But there are the year I arrived, 100,000 Compostelas were issued. You know, and then I went to do voluntary work in the Pilgrims office, writing Compostelas. Remember, the Compostelas used to be handwritten. Now, five, six, 700 Compostelas issued in a day. We were busy. 11, 1,200 Compostelas issued in a day, and there was a queue of 1 or 2 hours outside the office. And getting up near 2,000, pilgrims could be waiting for 4 hours often in the rain here in Santiago. So all of that has changed because the numbers have changed and systems have developed to deal with these huge numbers of pilgrims. There are still more men than women, marginally. The most significant change is when I walked, and the history of this is the Camino to Santiago was predominantly a Spanish activity. But nowadays, the latest figure I looked at just a wee while ago, 44% of the Compostelas issued went to Spaniards. So 56% went to foreigners, people outside Spain. And I think that's a pretty profound change in the demographics of it. And of course, one of the big changes is the huge numbers of Americans that are coming now onto the Camino. And
Yeah.
I remember my American friends saying when Martin Sheen's film The Way came out, my God, I hope we don't get more Americans because they'll change things. I say if Americans come on the Camino and they can get bars and cafes to provide cleaner toilets than they do at the moment, then that's a very good thing. But of course, um, these numbers are still only a fraction of the total
Yeah,
numbers
yeah.
of pilgrims who come.
There have been cycles. I remember a time when there were many Australians, there were many Germans, and at one stage, many South Koreans after some South Korean comedian walked the Camino. So I'm wondering whether that is one of the reasons, or whether Martin Sheen's movie The Way has made the Camino more popular in the United States. But possibly there's a deeper reason why we're finding so many Americans on the Camino.
Well, I don't think there's any doubt about this, Rhino, and why there's so many Americans at the moment moving to Spain. And the American embassy in Madrid has reported recently of a spike in the number of Americans wanting to emigrate to Spain. But I think this is part of a whole issue that you touched on of the spiritual thirst of people at the moment. We came through this terrible experience of COVID. It's almost as if we've forgotten about it.
Yeah.
We were all locked up. I was locked up in this very house that I'm sitting in, and
Yeah.
you can see just outside my front door. If I look left, I can see the spires of the cathedral. So I'm very close to the centre.
Mm.
And I was locked up inside this house for 3 months. But my front door opens on to the route to Finisterre and Machia, but it also opens up onto the route to the major hospital here in Santiago. Now, I very rarely hear an ambulance passing by my front door, but in these 3 months, every day, all day, ambulances were passing because COVID was a very we didn't know whether we were going to die or not. We
Mm.
didn't know when it would stop. We were powerless. Power had been taken from us by this pandemic. And I think at a simple level, people said, no, no, once I get out of here, I'm going to do the items on my bucket list. And if the Camino's on my bucket list, I'm going to go and do it. But at a deeper level, I think that was a wake-up call for humanity, that we should be looking for a deeper meaning in life, and we should be trying to improve ourselves
Yeah, yeah.
as human beings. And a way of doing this, of course, is to walk the Camino, to meet other people. And
Even if it just creates that awareness that there are more common themes in humanity than themes that
absolutely
divide
right.
us.
Absolutely right.
And we both live in Spain, and I find that one aspect that is so different from the UK, Germany, and South Africa from where I lived is that the community life in Spain is still very much alive.
Very much
Neighbors
alive.
neighbors look after each other. The village life has regular festivals in my village down here. People help each other.
Yes. Well, I wrote to somebody about this yesterday. During COVID, local bars closed, local albergues closed. And of course, the local bar is often sustained by pilgrims who use the albergue. But the local bar is also, in many of these villages along the Camino, the social center of the village. You see the old men sitting playing cards
Yeah,
or
yeah,
dominoes. It's like the community center, and they lost all of that. So
yeah,
that has come back, thankfully,
yeah.
and there's a great feeling of community. I find that as I go along, and of course, here in Santiago, I've got my friends are all Galician friends. Very few of them are English speakers. There's one or two Americans, I have to
Mm.
say, um, and that's fine. But
That that
a great sense of community.
that reminds me of an experience I had on the Aragonés last year when a guy running a local bar he was telling me about his financial problems, but he said, I can't close the local church. The church was the cafe, the bar.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. Yes.
yeah. And let's touch on another issue that I've found um, coming up quite a lot in the chat forums is women and safety issues. That seems to be a real topic.
Well, I think this is a real issue, and I think it's a real thing of Spanish men exposing themselves to women who are walking alone on the Camino or approaching women or whatever. And we've now started counting these reports on Facebook. So we're adding them up. The Guardian newspaper did a piece on this, and and I have to say that the leaders of Spanish organizations and the Spanish fora were the first. They were outraged that people thought this could be happening in their country. Now, I want to say to them, it is happening. It is happening. And of course, we can say the Camino is generally a very safe space, a very safe place, and there's very little crime happens on the Camino. But there is a significantly increasing incidence of women being intimidated, men exposing themselves. Now, this doesn't happen all day, every day. Now, as I say that, this doesn't happen all day, every day. In one forum, there's a very prominent Camino person who reported, she says, I've walked 20 Caminos, and of these 20 Caminos, this happened to me 7 times in 7 different Caminos.
Oh,
Now, that's an astonishingly high statistic.
yeah, yeah.
So, in saying all of this, we know that the Guardia Civil are taking this very, very seriously. And in many of the Camino routes, certainly the Camino Francés, the Camino Portugués, the Camino Inglés, they have stepped up patrols. You're likely to find a police car drawing up beside you, Reino, and saying, good afternoon, sir, is everything okay? Can I give you a cello? Because they also carry cellos. And I really, I like to see this very much. And of course, there's the wonderful app Alert Cops, which everybody, I believe, walking the Camino de Santiago should have downloaded. You register, you send them your photograph, through geolocation, they can tell exactly where you are. So I was walking in a very remote Camino in the south of Spain, on my own, and I turned a corner, and there a main water pipe had burst, and there was this huge geyser going up into the air, and of course I was miles from anywhere. Well, I just dialed alert cops, and they said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm a pilgrim walking on the Camino de Santiago, and I've discovered this burst water main, and it's flooding everywhere. I mean,
Yeah.
thousands of gallons of water." They said, "Thank you very much." Well, I walked on, and maybe an hour later, a police car drew up. And of course, they knew it was me because they had my photograph. And they said, "Thank you very much, sir, for reporting that. The matter's now in hand." And I was really, really impressed.
Yeah. So, what advice would you give to women wanting to walk the Camino alone? I mean, this is
Well,
app you just mentioned. Uh,
yes,
uh,
yes. And if you're in any way apprehensive, find another pilgrim to walk with on that particular stage. Ask in albergues if there have been any problems. And look, Rhino, six, 700,000 people walking the Camino routes. You need to keep your wits about you. Um, in the same way as in albergues, do not
yeah,
leave your passport and your money and your camera on your bed when you go for a shower, because they won't be there when you come
yeah,
back.
yeah.
So do not, because the Camino is such a good place, and we all get on so well together, and pilgrims are generally very genuine people, we cannot suspend our normal precautions. And women should not do that, is my advice.
I agree. Yeah, yeah. Now let's have a look at some of the main Camino routes. You've walked most of them,
Not
and
all, but most of them.
most of them, and the Camino Frances obviously still the most popular, with
Yes.
especially for people seeking community. And then we have the Camino Portugues getting more and more popular. What's the news on that? There are reports that they want to extend or build more albergues from Lisbon to make that route even more popular.
Yes, well, John Brierley, before he sadly died, was promoting the cause of more albergues on the route, and nothing has happened yet. There's an interesting statistic emerging, Rhino, that if you add up the number of people walking the Camino Portuguese central route and those now walking the Camino Portuguese coastal route, it's within hitting distance of the total walking the Camino Frances. So Portugal has become very, very popular indeed. Um, I think the route out of Lisbon has a couple of challenges, and one of the great challenges is the spacing of accommodation along the first few stages. But it's a great route, a very beautiful route in places, and an extremely historically interesting route.
Yeah, yeah.
If you want to see where the Knights Templars were, then walk
Uh,
walk from walk from Lisbon.
yeah. What's your favorite one?
Ah, well, I suppose my first Camino was my favorite. The Via de la Plata, I think, was my first love, and I've walked it 4 times, at different times of the year, and it's a wonderful route, and it's still a less traveled route because it has stages which are a bit challenging. But you know, Rhino, this memory sticks well in my head that I was reading Alison Raju's guidebook. She was the guide writer in these days, and she wrote, in the springtime, um, as you go up this hill in the spring, as you come to the crest of the hill in the springtime, there will be wildflowers as far as the eye can see. And of course, I was walking in wintertime, and when I got up to the top of the
Yeah.
hill, there was so much fog I couldn't see anything. So I went back in spring, and of course, she was right. And there was this massive, massive fields of wildflowers as far as the eye could see. And I thought I was actually walking on top of the world. And my memory from a number of routes has got these very, very vivid memories of almost ethereal moments. Sometimes it's It's meeting. Sometimes it's getting a bowl of soup when you're at your hungriest and your coldest.
Yeah,
And sometimes it's meeting someone else. And sometimes it's just a vista that appears.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I had an experience on the Primitivo when I was walking through clouds, low-hanging clouds, and as I got out of these low-hanging clouds, you could see the sunrise above these clouds, an ethereal moment, as you say.
Yes,
And these moments are simply unforgettable.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah,
My first time, I read about people getting up and walking in the middle of the night to avoid the heat. Well, I was walking in winter time, but I had a long distance to do the next day and I couldn't really sleep. Anyway, I slept enough and I woke up about 3 o'clock in the morning and I thought, just put on your boots, John, pack your rucksack and get on the move. And so I was outside, but I was outside walking under the stars. And it was cold, it was crisp, it was like walking in Scotland in the early morning. But the stars were shining brightly. I was walking by the moonlight. I could still see the yellow arrows. And it was a completely magical experience. And of course, I then had the experience of dawn coming up over the Camino, and the mist burning off as the sun came up over the horizon. Wonderful. You make me want to put my boots on and go out walking, Rhino.
oh, wow. Yeah, the Camino is always calling, isn't it?
It
Uh,
certainly is.
but let's look at the years ahead. How do you see the Camino developing a year or two ahead or 5 years ahead from today?
Well, I think numbers will continue to increase, and as they increase, hopefully more gradually. And I think we're seeing that. I think we're seeing that the growth rate at the moment is 6%. Now, in my day when I was doing the statistics in the Pilgrims office in 2013, 2014, so 10 years ago, we would see the Camino growing at the rate of about 12 to 14% per year. So if the growth rate reduces, as it seems to be doing, then although the numbers are very, very big, there's, you know, 14% of 100,000 is quite different from 6% of 600,000. So the numbers are big, but the facilities will emerge, and they're planning this huge planning going on for the next Holy Year in 2027 going on. Um, so the Camino will continue to grow. I'm very interested in a couple of developments, Rhino. I'm very interested in the developments, like the Irish have developed a thing called the Celtic Camino, where you can walk routes in your own country in Ireland, and then walk in the Camino Inglés, and the traditional route that Irish people would have walked from A Coruña, only 75 kilometers to Santiago. Now, the Camino snob in me would say that's too short.
Yeah.
But then I look at these associations like the Irish, the Camino Society in England, who have developed the Way of St. James from Reading Cathedral to Southampton, where the medieval pilgrims would have got on a boat to sail to, to Spain to walk to Santiago. The work which the Americans are doing, developing Camino routes. So this is encouraging people to get on walking shoes and to get onto this thing called the Camino. And there's no doubt that the spiritual background of the Camino to Santiago, um, ending at the tomb of St. James, one of the great apostles, of Jesus' apostles, there's no doubt that that's a tangible thing. So, and I think these are wonderful developments. I also happen to believe that I think we'll see a fashion developing of people walking, filling their rucksack, sleeping in albergues, and so forth. I think that core, um, I don't want to say old way, but another way of doing the Camino will emerge as a fashion in itself.
You mean sleeping in very simplistic
Yes,
albergs just
yes.
to have that community experience?
Having having time apart from your normal life, not using your mobile telephone unless it's absolutely essential, being with other pilgrims when you can, sleeping in communal facilities, and carrying all your worldly goods on your back was my first simple Camino experience that got me addicted to this thing. And I think that I can see that emerging as something that people will do. Now, unfortunately, it's exactly like church music. The people who specialize in plain chant think they're much better than people like me. So the people the people who sleep in albergues and carry their and have the simple will think they're much better. No, they're not. We're all the same.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we've spoken about the impact of nature and the ethereal effect. Uh, I would say that a real gem of all the Caminos I've walked are these incredibly deep conversations with fellow pilgrims.
Yes. Yes. And you might never see the person again, or they may remain lifelong
Yeah,
friends. And that's these are the great encounters, Rhino. In the same way as you and I met, I suspect through the internet, and then we met in real life. There's a great bond between pilgrims because we've got a lot to talk about. We've got our communal experience, which bonds us together. We've got the pain and the suffering we've been through. We've got the achievements of it, but also the things we've thought about and the realization about life's priorities, which I think pilgrims are happy to share with each other.
yes, yes. Um, uh, I think we might be at the cusp of a new consciousness with more and more people realizing, especially after COVID, there is such a thing as mortality. We're all going to die. And what is the purpose of collecting more and more things that don't bring us joy, uh,
Absolutely right.
that provide maybe immediate gratification, but it's only a very immediate gratification.
Mhm. Well, this is another semi-controversial issue that some people would say all these people with money staying in albergues and paying 12 euros a night for a bed and a shower,
Mm,
that's a disgrace. They should be paying for a hotel.
yeah,
Now, perhaps if they want to. My view is that the experience of staying in simple accommodation and not paying very much for it can be a life-changing thing. I speak about this, Rhino, of it was on the Via de la Plata, realizing one day that, and I put it like this, if the people who love me stop loving me, if I lost my job, if all of the money in my pension fund, because the stock market crashed, there was no money left. If I got a phone call to say, John, your house is burned down, and by the way, you forgot to renew the insurance. If my entire life collapsed, then all I need to do is pack two pairs of socks, two t-shirts, two sets of underwear, put on my hiking boots, and walk very happily on the Camino to Santiago. And I found that a hugely reinforcing and rewarding and comforting realization. I had the answer, but I
yeah.
didn't need to do it because I had the answer, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that's a great closing statement, John. And I do want to acknowledge you for all the work you are doing for the Camino and the service you're doing for fellow pilgrims. I hope you can keep on doing that work in Santiago for many years longer.
Can I
And
just stop you there? Can I just stop you there? Because, of course, I hope it will go on for many years to go. But the Camino is like a bank where you put in money and you get out more than you put in. I get out far more than I put into the Camino to Santiago. So thank you to you and all my other colleague and friends who are pilgrims. Thank you.
thank you, John.